Yes, that's okay, Anthony.
Thank you to our distinguished participants in this call. I appreciate that most of you may have had a good or a bit of a base of the water funds as a model, and most of you are actually involved in one way or the other. My name is Anthony Kariuki. I'm the general manager for the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund. I work within the TNC Nairobi office and been with the TNC since November 2016. So I'm excited that I've been with the water funds for the last 4 years plus. Just to mention that the case for the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund, we actually are at the combining both the operation and the implementation phase, scaling it out quickly. And I will be able to just share a bit of some highlights of then how that has impacted or provided opportunities in terms of fundraising and financing. Related to that, then also share a little bit of how are we seeing this helping us to move to the mature stage. Hence, this topic for me is exciting in those many aspects because then we are dealing with those two aspects of financing and fundraising at the same time to support those two stages of the water fund. Next slide, please. Yep, and just as I have shared, these are some of the materials that we have, and walk you through about 10 or so slides. So bear with me, and you can keep your questions to the end. So the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund is implemented in central Kenya, for those who may know the country, and it covers the two most important water towers. The area is about 1 million hectares, but most importantly is that this watershed provides 95% of the Nairobi city's water requirement. In addition, 65% of the Kenya's electricity energy. And more importantly, this spans two of the most iconic wildlife habitats, therefore teeming with very high biodiversity, but also two-thirds of this sub-watershed is occupied by small-scale farmers. For many of you who are already working with those upstream activities, now you appreciate the interface between water security, biodiversity, and people's livelihood. And this is what the Nairobi Water Fund is trying to accomplish. Next slide. And as you see in this next slide, our aspiration is basically to make the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund the go-to place in terms of how to bring stakeholders together to achieve that one common goal, secure the water sources and provide water security for all. And for this reason, this is how we adopted the water fund model. This aspirational captivation is where we want to go. And if you have a bit of some keen eye, and you can see the kind of activities we really looking to implement and going on, and therefore to link the upstream with the downstreams and make sure that all the stakeholders and different parts of the watershed participate in a meaningful way. And next, and to achieve this, we have three goals. One is to achieve clean water. The second is to have meaningful community benefits, and more importantly, collectively conserve nature. And to do that, therefore, our strategy is to fix farms and forests. As I said, a third of it is other protected areas, and we have forests and game reserves as well. But more importantly, the two-thirds that is under small-scale farmers is where a lot of the conservation activities are focused as a priority. In this slide, as you see, therefore, we have operationalized the water fund model. As you can see on the left, on the right side of that slide, most of you are familiar with how this is organized. Why this is key for this discussion is then this is what has defined how we do our financing and fundraising or resource mobilization, as it were. Critical to note is that the link with the upstream and the downstream stakeholders has very defined purposes under the water fund, where incentives in terms of funds, tools, and any other resources from the downstream or the users of the water is harnessed, managed, and coordinated through the water fund as a platform or hub, so that it can incentivize the people in the watershed. And as you may recall, the operating principle of the water funds is that it is cheaper to address those water challenges upstream rather than further downstream. And in this case, therefore, I would like to signpost in the sense of that under our model, we have identified this institutionalization mechanism to support our financing and fundraising, and we have a blended mechanism. So we look for and receive private sector contributions. We also look for and go for subsidies and grants. Some of them can be by multilateral government, regional, or even local levels. We also seek for grants. Largely, this is from foundations, either private or by public agencies, and very, very important services and partner fees. And we'll see how that fits in, and I'm sure in different contexts this applies. Most important for us is donations to an endowment. And as you see in our pillar, in our water fund, we deliberately chose that as one of our operating principles to establish an endowment so that it can be one of the key sources of financing the activities of the water fund in the watershed. And more important, and lastly, also looking at other sources. And there are ideas out there for waterways and crowdfunding, for example. And I'm sure there are many examples you may also have. So critically here is to appreciate that this then, once it's well mapped, it helps in making the decision that a water fund can be established, is feasible, and there exist potential possible sources of financing it. Equally, that it helped us actually to include those actions that we need to take so that we are able to take advantage and convert those possible sources of financing. And more importantly, help us to develop a model for financial sustainability. And as I said, in this case for us, the endowment pillar is a very critical one. Next slide, please. And building on that, therefore, it helps one to be able to make that decision then on how to set up the financing and also the fundraising. And I'm using here an example of how then you can come up with a sustainable financing strategy. As you may know, at this stage then you already have either defined completed or even completed the designing of the program. We were lucky. For me, I came in when we were just doing the phase 3 and the phase 4 implementation and operation, and therefore we had very clearly defined goal and also outcomes. To the left, you can see in that illustration, therefore, through that, it was already very clear what the activities are and how much would they cost, and what timelines and with what targets they will be implemented. And therefore, putting all this together then allowed us to therefore develop a financing and fundraising strategy. Next slide. It's important to note then that within that strategy for us, and I think for many, there are some key elements that support it. One of it is that there has to be a very clear business case. And as you've seen from the previous slide, if you have a clear goal, clear activities, timelines, including targets, then you have an appreciation of what resources you require. And therefore, the business case helps then to communicate that to a wider stakeholder. Second, you must have willing and available champions to lead that course, because fundraising is a journey. And finally, you must have had a good mapping and understanding of resources that are available. And in this case, those are potential resources that are available. As we saw in the previous slide, we were very clear about some of those, and therefore the funding strategy is to help how to capture that. In this case, you would want to answer the question, how reliable are existing add or prospective resources to meet the water security outcomes. And related, what percentage of funding is sustainable? And this is important because you have operational costs, and then you have conservation investment costs, and you also want to make sure then water fund, like for our case, is the independent entity, is also institutionally sustainable. Next slide. So in using that big information and background, as it were, the Upper Nile Water Fund, therefore, has a very clear delineated organization setup. That is what you see on our organogram on the right, and also a legal framework that allows that arrangement to be implemented. But I just wanted to share with you a bit of a snapshot of then what this meant to us when we were looking at about the budgets, the financing needs, that's the budget, and then how to partition it in terms of those available potential funding streams. We, at the moment, then had part of the partners, one of them being the promoter, the TNC, already committing some resources. We were lucky to get public financing, but of course you go seeking out of a GFE fund and private sector as well. But also for us, we have entrenched the beneficiaries to be co-investors in this. And how we do this is through the cost sharing, where for technologies then that are available for improving sustainable management and adopted by the farmers, each of the benefiting household has a certain percentage ranging from 25, 30 to 50%. And therefore, that cash comes and goes directly to co-finance the activities. And this is related then to what I will be sharing a little bit more in detail, how we have concentrated to create a fundraising framework that is set around creating an endowment while implementing, supporting conservation investments at the same time. So this is kind of an indicative of the basket of resources then and sources of the same that we have. Next slide, please. And therefore, for the case of Nairobi, Upper Nairobi Water Fund, as I mentioned, we deliberately are accelerating the creation and operational phase. There are those who choose, first of all, to create, and then raise resources, and then do the investments. And for our case, I think the need was so urgent, and also the stakeholders persuaded themselves there was no opportunity, if you may so wish, luxury of time to set up a water fund, look for funding, and then start in a future date to do implementation. So we've been putting that together, and at the same time having the mix of those sources of funding and participants around the table. And briefly, just to note, we have then actualized donor or public funds fundraising, and we have been lucky, especially with the government of Kenya and the Global Environment Facility, that provided us a starter kit of about 7.2 million. This has helped to accelerate the work of the fund and make sure that we are doing both the creation and the operationalization. Secondly, we are very deliberate on approaching or accessing philanthropy givings. This is both from corporates and individuals as well. A key aspect of our strategy here is leveraging. That is both in kind and in cash. We are lucky to have in Kenya now a default system that allows county governments to have budgets and are also responsible for key activities. This in effect are aligning with what a lot of the activities we do for conservation as default actions. But more importantly, the beneficiaries and other partners. They may not provide money in cash, in dollars, but the leveraging helps a lot because it's a shared goal. And many other partners have much more they're also doing. Fourthly, is now our key pillar, which is the endowment. And this is established on the basis that we seek out upfront resources, funds, and then we invest them through the market systems. And the interest earned is what then is used to continuously and sustainably support the investments of the conservation. We also have an opportunity, and this is a bit slow in our case, on the tariffs. As you know, the users of the water at the downstream have an opportunity to participate through this, but because of but for our case, there hasn't been a structured tariff that feeds directly to this conservation through the water fund. Though it's a political process, we already exploring how to involve them, both the water service provider and the regulator. And this will be a growth area for the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund. So critically to probably just affirm is that from our experience, it is becoming much more clear that for us to sustainably fund the water fund into the medium and the long term, investing now to raise resources for an endowment fund is a strategic approach. And we have created a campaign, as you see in the next picture, slide, on how to actualize that. So we are working with a target of 7 million. And what this means is that for you to successfully fundraise for endowment, campaign is one of the good options. So we have set up a campaign that is targeting the 7 million, but 3 things that are critical to mention is that a campaign is a structured, sustained process of fundraising that is led by the champions, as we mentioned earlier, or the leaders of a water fund. They must be available and engaged. How does it work? It has a science and an art in it. In the real sense is that once you establish what your target is, your strategy must be clear on how to raise it. And it starts with what components or how much of it would be. For our case, we are looking at, if we were to raise the 7 million, we at least need a gift of about 1 million. And as you see, the pyramid inverted goes down. If you end up with so many small gifts, it becomes increasingly expensive and inefficient, and almost impossible to achieve your target. So we have a campaign target for the 7 million over a 2-year period, and this is rolling. There is some good lessons we are already running on this, and we will be happy to share with any other water fund that may choose to go this way. Next slide. Now, to bring it home then, as we already have mentioned, we are using the endowment as our main pillar for this. And this is just an illustration of what it means in terms of appropriation of it. This is an illustration of where we are now, who are giving, how much is given, but more so what we are working with in terms of the medium, in the short term to the medium, and then we will be evaluating ourselves. So this is by the year 2022 on how far we are to our target, and then make deliberate efforts to make sure that we can actualize that. Much more can be available on a need for, again, those who may wish to go this route. And the next one, please. Finally, perhaps for the purpose of this conversation, a few lessons that we have picked along the way. One is that for you to succeed in fundraising, your strategy must be underpinned by a very strong, clear case for support, what you call a compelling business case. Most of you who already have gone through some of the trainings, the startups part of the water fund, I'm sure you already appreciate the reason and how that is brought together. Second, the whole question about why would other people care? So the story of change is so important, and how you package it. Because the whole question is, why does our work matter? Why would anyone then partner with you and give you their money and their time? Thirdly is leadership. Water funds, just like we have discussed above, these are stakeholders that come together and create a core platform, and more importantly, co-invest in it. And therefore, if you do not have champions, leaders and people of integrity that can move this forward, this then can become a huge challenge in operationalizing the full tenets of the water fund. And fourthly, skills and tools for fundraising. It's assumed that fundraising, people can and will do it, but the water fund is resource heavy. And as you already probably may have picked out of it, resources are required upfront. A lot of work in the feasibility, design, and then the operational phase. And therefore that has to come up early and should be able to have the right people around the table to provide that both in cash and in kind, and therefore aspire to move on and then inspire others to join your case. So those, in a nutshell, are some key lessons that you may want to carry along as you define your financing and resource mobilization strategy for your water fund. Thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to me, and I'll be happy to engage with any questions and reflections in the plenary. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Really appreciate. Keep the questions coming in the chat. They'll be answered at the end of all presentations. Next, we'll have Luis. Luis, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Florence, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining. So I will take you through the journey of the Greater Cape Town Waterfront as another example, and I'll share from where we started with the waterfront to where we are now, some of the tools that were developed, the commitments that we received so far, and how do we look into the future to make sure that this Greater Cape Town Waterfront is sustainable. Now, a waterfront is only as sustainable as the funding you have to implement. It's all about implementation, and without sustainable funding, waterfronts just cannot get off the ground and stay in the air. And you heard from Anthony how the Upper Tana Nairobi waterfront is setting themselves up for sustainability. So let's look at what we did in the case of Cape Town. Just want to make sure it moves. Okay, so the Greater Cape Town Waterfront is a public-private partnership, like all water funds. The Greater Cape Town Waterfront Steering Committee consists of national, provincial, and local government partners, as well as the private sector. What we did is we took the private sector on board right from the start during the development of the feasibility studies to get full buy-in, and it really worked well. We also have NGO partner, which is WWF. We have multiple partnerships with research institutions, with national government institutions, and then supporters. The Cape Town receives its water through a very complex and integrated supply system. It's called the Western Cape Water Supply System. It consists of multiple big dams or reservoirs, smaller dams, pipelines, canals, and water treatment works. Cape Town shares its water with the agricultural sector as well as other smaller municipalities. The 87% of Cape Town's water come from outside its boundaries, and most of the water resources are managed by the national government, Department of Water and Sanitation. Cape Town only manages 27% of its resources. Now, what the Water and Sanitation Department does is water gets allocated to all the different users, and the Cape Town gets its annual allocation of just almost 4 million cubic meters every year. If you look at the pictures on the right, it shows those big reservoirs that I was referring to, and two of those reservoirs are managed by Cape Town. It's the blue labels, it's Steenbras and Wemmershoek, as well as the Atlantis Aquifer. The Berg River, Teewaters, and Voorvlei dams are shared resources and managed by the Department of Water and Sanitation. But all these dams fit into the picture on the left as part of the Western Cape Water Supply System. Cape Town almost ran out of water in 2018. So the city of Cape Town looked at different options to augment water supply. And even though the drought didn't happen, it was also already predicted that Cape Town would run out of water by 2021 because the demand will exceed the supply. To avoid that situation, the city looked at desalination, groundwater exploration, water reuse. And historically, the emphasis was on engineering infrastructure, a so-called grey infrastructure. So where does ecological infrastructure fit into this picture? With the new water program of the City of Cape Town, it was acknowledged that nature-based solutions is also should also be part of the new water program. And it was mainly based on the fact that we did the business case for the Greater Cape Town Waterfront, and the studies have shown that 2/3 of the Western Cape water supply system is invaded by alien plants. Now, alien plants use much more water than the indigenous vegetation. Studies have shown that invasive plants use up to 20% more because they're bigger, have bigger root systems, and if they grow in the wrong places, such as wetlands or river riparian areas or subcatchments, that's where they do the most damage. The business case has shown that at the stage when we developed the business case, which was 2018, the current water losses at that stage was 55 billion liters of water every year as a result of the alien plants in the catchments. And if we don't do anything about it, the water losses will double by 2045. So we looked at where the region loses most water, and we identified 7 priority subcatchments. And those subcatchments were then ranked in terms of their priority for intervention, where one can get the highest return on investment. Now, the business case was launched in 2018. And if you look at the 7 priorities, we can reclaim 70% of the current water losses, which equates to 2 months water supply for Cape Town, by just focusing on 32% of the Western Cape water supply system. So it's all about focus, and it's all about where one can get the highest return on investment. So we also went one step further, and as you recall, I mentioned that the City of Cape Town already had plans to explore how they can augment the water supply. They looked at desalination, water reuse, groundwater exploration, both managed aquifers such as the Cape Flats and the Table Mountain Group aquifer, which is a huge aquifer, and it's mostly very expensive and quite technical to abstract water. So this graph showed that by investing in nature, one can get the highest return on investment, and it's up to 1/10 of the full cost of any of the other options. And if one compare that with desalination, it shows clearly that it's much more cost effective to invest in nature-based solutions. But what we also need to say is that it's not one or the other, but it's a blend of options that the city has to its disposal. And having this business case can help the city make a decision on where the low-hanging fruits are. In other words, where the highest return on investment is. And this goes for any utility, because utilities would want to know where they can get the biggest value for money. We also developed a decision to support tool, and that tool help us to we look at how we can get to sustainable funding strategy, and how we evaluated the water yield at different assurance levels. We looked at the projected benefits associating with different funding scenarios, and also the funding gap and how we can bridge that. So the return on investment was modeled to determine the benefits of nature-based solutions. Firstly, we looked at the business as usual scenario. So it's not that nothing has happened, but where if one needs the program to be implemented in full to reap the benefits of nature-based solutions. So the business as usual scenario is ask the question, what happens if we don't scale this work and have full implementation? We also then went one step further, and we identified the target investments that we will get the highest improvement on ecosystem services per unit cost. And then we looked at how much will the nature-based solutions impact the benefits and who care about it. So the map that you see in the middle is the darker color shows where the most water is lost, where the invasive infestations are the highest. And the graph on the right shows the difference between the business as usual and the full intervention scenario. We also modeled the impact of the different scenarios on the increase in invasive plants, the level of percentage area covered, as well as the reduction on stream and on system yield. So the graph that you see on the left-hand side, if you look at the red line, shows that if we don't do anything, the invasive level will increase over time, and the blue line shows that if we go to full implementation, the invasive level will taper down over time as long as we maintain the area free of invasive trees. The slide on the right hand side is the inference of the left hand side, because you can see there, as we clear the invasives, less water is used, and the blue line shows the increase in water as a result of clearing invasive trees. Then we also looked at who cares about this. So we looked at the avoided yield reduction by each of the dams that I spoke about earlier. And then we looked at the avoided yield reduction by each of the users. And Cape Town, being the biggest user, it shows here that it has the biggest benefit, and then agriculture and other urban industrial users also benefit by avoided yield reduction. Then we looked at the lifespan. Invasive water funds are not quick fixes. One needs to look at a long-term projection of a water fund. And we saw that if we invest, and this graph shows that there are two phases. So the blue lines show the high impact phase of the first 6 years. And if we clear those 7 priority subcatchments of invasive trees, the cost will come down if we maintain it. And if you look at the dotted line, the water benefits will accrue. So we use this graph to talk to potential investors, including the City of Cape Town. And as Anthony said, it's important to have a business case, to have clear figures to show what we want to achieve. We also looked at, so what if we don't do anything? And this has shown that the initial clearing cost will roughly double within 15 years if we allow the clearing of the first 6 years to lapse. So this was again another very powerful message that we that we used to approach our potential donors as well as the city. So then we looked at the business as usual scenario, which is that FY19, that's on the far left-hand side. So that was the situation before the water fund. And then we looked at where could the funding come from. So the graph here shows you that in the first 6 years, the funding, there's a blend of funding between the private and the public sector. And the City of Cape Town, as I mentioned, bought into the idea of nature-based solutions. And the city is now fully committed to continue the contribution to the water fund. Now, in the beginning, we leaned very heavily on private sector funding, but for the maintenance phase, we will lean more heavily on public sector funding, and you will see in the next slide how that will be apportioned over the lifespan of the water fund. So this is the slide that I'm talking about. On the right-hand side, you can see the high impact phase. About 30% is private sector, but during the maintenance phase, about 10% comes from the private sector. Whereas if you look over the lifespan of the water fund, which is 30 years, on average, 20% will come from the private sector, but the bulk of the funding will come from the users, which is the City of Cape Town, other municipalities, and then also the catchment management agencies, which are responsible for maintaining the catchment. So the 3 options that we looked at in our sustainable funding strategy to make sure that we sustain the water fund and over the 30-year period is, first of all, one-time funding contributions. Then we looked at sustainable recurring funding sources, and then additional mechanisms to maintain the watersheds free of invasive trees. So in terms of one-time funding contributions, especially during the first 6 years, corporate replenishment is a large portion of the work that of the funding, philanthropy, and then global donors. When we look at sustainability, that's where I mentioned the City of Cape Town, which is the main water user. So the beneficiaries invest in upstream activities to reap the benefits of additional water and increased water yield and water security. And as Anthony said, it's important to understand who cares about it. So downstream beneficiaries, the cities who are dependent and municipalities who are dependent on the water and agriculture, that's where they will invest in their water security as well as their catchment management agencies. Then we also look at establishing an endowment. Now the Greater Cape Town Water Fund will become a separate entity by 2023. But what is important is that we cannot establish a separate entity without having a sustainable funding strategy and commitments. So the endowment will cover the cost of implementation, because it costs money to implement a program. We're also looking at in-kind contributions, and if it's necessary, one can also look at repayable financing. So these three options make up the sustainable funding strategy for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Louise. So if you have questions for Louise, kindly type them in the chat, but we'll also have a session where you can be able to ask your question live. But in the meantime, you can put it in the chat. So we'll be going to the next presenter from Morocco, who is Yusla Madani.
Hi, Florence. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it and we can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, great. So hello, everybody. I'm Yusra Madani. I work for WWF North Africa. I'm office director based in Morocco, and our team is based in Casablanca, and we are working to implement the Sebou Water Fund in the Sebou Basin. It's a 40,000 square kilometer basin. We are targeting 6.2 million people. I will share with you our humble experience in Morocco, because even if we've been working on that fund for a water fund for more than 3 years now, we are still in the beginning of the road, and we have a lot of things to do, a lot of things to learn, because we are learning by doing. So we are very inspired by the work done by TNC in the other water funds and in the water funds that we visited, thanks to the help of our colleagues from TNC. So just to explain, our water fund is part of a project named Wamensbu, which has actually 3 outcomes. It's the promotion of IWRM and IRBM, the integration of IFLO in the water law in Morocco, and the implementation of the Sebou Water Fund. So the international partners for that project are WWF Wetlands International, IUCN Tour du Vala, and we started phase 1 in 2018. So we will finish in 2020, and we had for that first phase 1.2 million euros for the 3 outcomes, and for phase 2 we have 2 more years, and we will have a budget of 450,000 euros. So we used the share of the water fund from that budget to, first of all, create the NGO Living Planet Morocco, which is the official partner of WWF in Morocco. And we are acting as a team of Living Planet Morocco as the secretary of the Sebou Water Fund. So MAVA is covering the salaries of the team and the management fees till December 2022. We also used the money to conduct scientific studies. So we had conducted a lot of studies on climate change, hydrology, biodiversity, sustainable practices of water and land use, agriculture, IFLO, and other economic studies like the feasibility study, legal status of the water fund, socioeconomics and trends, the business case, and the TIV, which is conducted by our partner Wetlands International to assess economic value of ecosystem services. So the budget also helps us to cover other costs, like the workshops, trainings, and exchange visits we organize mainly for our public partners and for the members of the steering committee of the Sebo Water Fund. And at the beginning, and I would just start by one of the challenges we face actually was getting public and private sector involved with us in the project, because it was a new concept in Morocco, and it was very difficult to make them understand exactly what was about Water Fund. So we used that exchange visit. And we thanked TNC because they had us organize an exchange visit to the Nairobi Water Fund, and that helped us a lot to convince our public partners and the steering committee members. And they could witness actually in the field what the Water Fund is bringing to the local population. And we had also a second challenge with the private sector in Morocco. The first year we were conducting that studies, and we visited a lot of we met with a lot of corporates in Morocco, but we couldn't make them invest in the Water Fund. And so we decided the second year to concentrate our work in the field and to have something concrete to show to the partner, to potential partners from the private sector. So we used part of the budget to fund local projects for the local community. So in 2020, we funded five first projects, and in 2021, we fund 10 more projects, actually. Now, here we can see some pictures of the ongoing projects, the five first projects funded by the Sebo Water Fund. And I will speak of the second challenge we had actually is that we didn't have the business case at the beginning. We just received it last week, which is a relief. Now we submitted it to the international partners and to TNC also to have their input on it. And it was one of the challenges because, for example, when we went to see the Ministry of Finance, they told us directly, come back when you'll have your business case. So now we have all the information we need through the different studies we did and through the business case. We know exactly how, if we invest, for example, one Moroccan dirham, we will get back to Moroccan dirhams, and the payback period will be 14 years. So those are valuable information that allow us to know exactly how much money we need, how much we will have to ask from public partners, from private partners. And now in the next months, we will start the phase of fundraising, actually. So we will go and visit again the private and public sector with our business case, with the videos and pictures of the projects in the field. And we will try to have them invest in one of those four categories, which are water and wetlands, socioeconomic development, biodiversity, education, and cultural heritage. We started also discussing with our public partners in-kind contributions. So now we are working on an MOU for all the members of the steering committee to define exactly their in-kind contribution. For the moment, our steering committee is only composed of public partners, because, as I said, we didn't succeed at the beginning to have the private sector with us. So we started with the public sector, and they will be joined by the private sector. We're going to have funders from the corporates. So the steering committee is, the members are mainly public partners from government, the Sebo Basin Agency, the Water and Forest Department, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Water Department, the Ministry of Interior, and the Ministry of Tourism. And now we started also submitting for calls to international grants and call for proposals. So I have the good news is that this month we just signed a contract with the Just Small Grants UNDP, because one of our proposals have been approved. It's not a very big amount because we had to bring co-funding from our budget from MAVA, but it's a total budget of $100,000, and we will use that money to reinforce the Cebu Water Fund and to start working on to ensure the integrated management of the lakes of the Middle Atlas, and mainly for the restoration of our lake. I will show you some picture of the situation of the lake in the Cebu Basin. So this first grant will be used to work mainly on the restoration of those lakes. That's it.
Thank you, Yusla. That was a great presentation. So Yusla, for questions to be addressed to Yusla, kindly put them in the chat, and then we'll have them answered after Bob's presentation, which is the only one remaining. So Bob Okero is our Corporate Affairs Director for the Africa region.
Florence, thank you. And sorry, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Bob Okello. I am the corporate engagement lead for TNC in Africa. I joined TNC early in the year, having spent a lot of my time working in the private sector. I'd like to spend a few minutes today to share with you briefly about just how TNC goes about engaging with the private sector, why it is important to engage with the private sector, and then give you some insights on what is important for the private sector that you should look out for and what they don't have that you might have, and then would create that sweet spot so that they can come to support the development or the funding of water funds. So I hope that you can see the screen. That's a full presentation mode, hopefully. Can you see it properly? I hope you can.
Yeah, we can, but not in the full presentation mode, sorry.
So how do I do this? Do I make it? I will cancel and then just do this something else. I struggle with that a little. I'll keep it on that, and let's see if that works. Yeah, so at TNC, we got 5 categories of how we engage with the private sector. And this is something that I would suggest that you put in mind as you think about companies in the regions where you operate. The first one is that we most likely will want to engage with companies so that we can transform how they do business. So we want to support changes in their operations or where they do their sourcing so that that can benefit the environment. So for instance, if you have got companies that in agriculture sector, for instance, and they want to extend their agricultural lands by destroying forests, we could work with those companies to encourage them to intensify their agriculture instead of getting into forests and destroying nature. And that could apply to companies that perhaps use extensive levels of fertilizers that damage the soils, that we can work with them, bringing our science to help them to change how they do their work. Because you can only influence them if you're working with them and not if you're working on your own and perhaps having an adversarial relationship. The second area is around policy. And so we could partner with companies to be able to influence or change policy or enact policy. So Anthony presented earlier about the opportunity around tariffs. So if you think about a watershed, but these water utility companies that have consumers consuming their water, that you can actually work with the legislators or politicians to enact legislation that allows the utilities to be able to charge consumers some amount of water that goes to watershed conservation. And this is something that we're exploring in the Upper Tana Nairobi Waterfront, for instance. So that's an opportunity. So you have to bring it as policy that then has legal force of law, so that then you can use it to fund your water funds. The most common one for us is philanthropy. Really, that many companies are successful. They're doing business within communities, and they want those communities to do well. So they just find it a responsibility of theirs to be able to appreciate the work that TNC is doing and to continue to support our work. They give us money that is unrestricted that we can put towards developing of water funds. And then there's an opportunity also around what we call marketing partnerships. So many times we could partner with companies and have consumer-facing campaigns. So you have a typical brand that is sold, and a portion of the sales is donated by that particular company to go towards funding conservation initiatives. And the company has a lot of benefits by doing that. So they engage their customers, they engage their consumers, they build their brand, and also they make some sales. So this is also an area that we partner with them. And then lastly is around mitigation. So there are companies that have significant negative impact on the environment, and sometimes you want to work with these companies to be able to either mitigate or offset those negative impacts. So the case of carbon credits or carbon offsets would be critical. So a company that perhaps is doing mining and damaging the environment might be able to buy carbon credits that are available in the market from a certain project that we are doing elsewhere, and those proceeds go to repair or to advance conservation initiatives. So those are the 5 areas, and I think for the case of water funds, mostly is around philanthropy, and then to some degree we've been able to do marketing partnerships. And then the corporates are critical in catalyzing change. And if you pay attention perhaps to the lower part of that slide, is that they have got significant footprint. They've got big brands that are recognizable. They've got enough financial resources. And so their engagement in a number of these water funds is just critical for us and gives us the momentum. The one thing that you will see is that because of the products that they sell and the number of consumers that they can reach, they are a good platform that we can use for education. So educating not just communicating amongst institutional stakeholders, but consumers themselves, so that regular citizens can appreciate the need for watershed conservation. In the Upper Tana, for instance, you will hear of a story about how farmers were told to protect the source water. So they were able to have a yellow line around the source water where they cannot go to graze in that source water, the source of the Sasmua Dam that then feeds the water fund. And so if you don't educate the ordinary citizen about the importance of water conservation, then you cannot. So you can use corporates, the infrastructure they have to create this education. They've got a fairly significant political profile, as you know. They lobby governments, they lobby the executive every so often. And once they're on board with you, you can use the muscle they have and the listening ear that they always get from parliamentarians because of just the number of jobs, the taxes they pay, something that you can ride on. So this is an opportunity for us. So successful engagement with corporates will encourage or inspire other organizations beyond even just the private sector to come to the party and support the development of water funds. So on the top part of the slide, where we talk about priority for the year 2025, water fund goals, and this is more global, that we as TNC need to demonstrate that we are investing strongly in sources of protection. I think, as you will have seen, that we are rolling out water funds across the continent. A number of them are TNC led, and many of them also are led by you. So like the Cebu Water Fund that I just presented here is one where we are working closely and supporting, but we don't run. We have another one in Freetown, which is led by CRS. So there are many of them so we need to be able to demonstrate the private sector that we are keen, we are strong, and we are putting our energy behind it. Building alliances with industry to be able to promote source water protection, this is something that is key, that we do this. Building capacity of people like you so that you are well equipped to engage with the number of the different stakeholders in your areas to bring to life the water funds is something that we do. And I think there's a lot of online material. So some questions there that you can learn on yourself, but also training similar to this one. And then working to enact legislation that advances the interest of watershed conservation. As you can see, the issue of tariffs is something we mentioned, and this championing for the increased investments in water sector. But what I think would be a little more insightful from my personal experience is really the things that I would like you to pay attention to. So for you to successfully fundraise from companies, it is really helpful to appreciate what companies are looking for. Many times, if we've not had a chance to either work in the corporate sector, we do not know what is important to them, and therefore we don't put ourselves in their shoes to appreciate why it is that they may actually reject our application for a proposal for funding. So couple of things, and this is not exhaustive. We could talk about it in the Q&A. But number one is that let's just appreciate that companies don't have unlimited budgets. They have limited budgets for which they have assigned to either drive philanthropy or their brand or their stakeholder engagement. The way that we can use them is that we know that their catalytic funding could be very, very important in unlocking new funding. So we need to appreciate that they are not going to give us all the funding that we need, but we need to be able to target that they can give us something that starts us off. And that's something that you could see that Louise demonstrated in South Africa, that initially it was private sector that came to the party and gave a little funding. And now that they've inspired, they've spurred on the development of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, the bigger task is now money is going to come from the public sector to be able to sustain it going forward. So that's important for us to notice. The other thing is that they want to work with credible partners. So if you are going to them, it is just important that you have got the credibility, that you have been, you have a history of having done things the right way, and they can partner with you. So they're always looking out for good partners. So it is not that they actually don't need partners. They actually look out to find, can we find partners that can work with us to drive our sustainability agenda. So they want to maximize their investments through fewer intermediaries. And here what we mean is that the same way that they make their investments, their commercial investments, they're looking for return on investment. So they'll be thinking about an investment in a water fund and wondering, are we going to get return on investment? So they don't want to deal with too many people. If you can go to them directly with a concrete proposal and show them that you can utilize their money well, and you can give them return on investment, and that could be in the form of, how many liters of water that would be delivered downstream, how many people would be employed or gainfully benefit economically, whether it's women or youth, that you can give them that into quantifiable metrics that they can use internally. This is really what they need. So, and that speaks to the point around being measurable, sustainable impact. And one thing that I think we also want to appreciate is that many companies are really looking to embed sustainability. So that's whether that's conservation or other forms of sustainability into their core business. Very few times will a company do things these days away from their core business. So if a company is a big water user, it is very likely that they will want to support watershed conservation. So the important thing also is to, before you approach a company, try and read about what they support on sustainability. Look at their website, read their brochures, maybe go to their meetings, because if you send a proposal to a company that has nothing to do with water, the chances are that they will reject you. They may say, okay, you may see us as a philanthropic organization, but what you're asking us is completely out of our range. So you want to be able to, first of all, approach the companies that are highly likely to support you because they have already stated on their website or in their pronouncements, public pronouncements, that this is an area that they like to support. So let's try and match those things so that you don't waste a lot of your time talking to people who will not appreciate what you're saying. And many companies these days are not doing sustainability to be able to look good, to get good PR, or to endear themselves to the public or to the government. They actually feel that it is the right thing to do, and they ingrain it in their core business today. So previously, it was a very defensive approach where you can get some nice photo ops in the media, you cut a check, and you get away with it. But these days, if you sit inside there, they're looking at how can we do the right thing with community? How can we ensure business continuity by supporting watershed conservation so that water will flow to us? How can we ensure that the communities we serve do not they do not suffer a lack of access to clean water that then will impact how we do our business. So those are things that are important to them. So generally, companies are looking for someone who can go to them and say, what is important to you? So what is important to them is something that we need to appreciate. So it's not really just what we want and we say, okay, we are doing the water fund, so give us money. No, what is important to them, because they also have an agenda and they want to be able to say that, does that agenda align with what you're pursuing? Now, if we know what is important to the companies, and that list is not exhaustive, then it is possible that we have something they don't have so that we can offer them what we don't have, and then we meet in the middle, okay? So from the TNC point of view, and I believe from the organizations that you represent, you've got capabilities that they don't have. You know, so in the case of in the watershed, for instance, providing the watershed science is something that they don't have, because that's not what they do every day. They don't even employ people who have that. So they would like to get that data from you, that conservation data or science from you. They would like to be able to access certain stakeholders that they ordinarily would not have. So for instance, Anthony talked about how we work closely with the county governments and national government. Many of these companies would like to be able to meet government officials because they've got other interests away from that watershed agenda. So the fact that this convening platform allows them to meet these different stakeholders is something that is of value that we are giving them, which they ordinarily don't have. You know, it can even help them to manage risks away from where they operate, because they say, okay, we can access these government officials here, and we got other issues. Courtesy of what we are doing, we can be receptive to that. The other thing is that you know, we can demonstrate that we can transparently use the finances they give us without them worrying too much. So when they come to audit, we are giving them reports that they can use internally, and this is easy for them. And things like also M&E capability, you know, out there that they don't have. Structuring carbon opportunities or carbon offsets is a difficult subject that they don't have, and you can do that for them because it's something that we understand. The other thing that we can offer them, and I believe that you can too, is geographical footprint. Many times you operate where they don't operate, and they would like to come there, and they can come there through you. So those are the things that you can give them, which they may not have, especially in the communities. They might want to be able to access a community, and they don't have an inlet into that community. So you can actually soften the ground for them to be able to get in the community. I can give you a quick example. A lot of the companies that are based in Europe, let's say the big supermarkets, they source their horticulture and greens from Africa, but they don't have a local footprint or like offices on the continent. If they want to do something with our government or with those communities, they would need somebody like us to be able to help them to access those farmers where they can negotiate to source this produce, you know, at better prices. These are things that we have that they may not have. I've talked about the convening platform. I think that we have local knowledge that they may not have, and this is something that you know, you'll be able to offer them. So please feel free to tell them that you really do this and you have it. Always show them where the interests you know, lie. Why is it important for them to participate in source water protection or building the water funds? You know, they need to be able to see that if we don't have access to sustainable water in the cities where they live, then it will not affect their operations, but it will affect even their consumers. And when their consumers are struggling with access to water that they can use domestically, they will not have time to buy those products. They want to, first of all, fix these basics. So being able to tell that story in a way that they understand it is critical, you know, to get or unlock those funds. And very quickly also, Anthony talked about sustainability of the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund. I mean, most companies know that their business is successful because they don't keep borrowing to fund them. So ensuring that a project is sustainable is critical. Demonstrate to them that you're able to bring in a pool of funding and you put in the mechanisms that are there so that the project does not need to attract funding perpetually or fundraising perpetually. So endowment funds are an example of that, where now you can actually invest your money in a bank and get the interest that then funds things. And so that question was put on the chart. So if you have got a significant amount of dollars and you bank it, you put it in a bank in a fixed deposit account, you'll be able to get your interest at the end of the year, and that can fund your activities perpetually. So this is really the purpose of those endowment funds. We have an opportunity to collaborate with industry and share best practice. I mean, in the case of TNC, with the Upper Tana Water Fund and with the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, these are actually best-in-class cases that we are putting out there to market to companies. And look what we have done by partnering with the private sector, with the government, and with the local communities. And so TNC has also some programs, like we have a training program with Arizona State University, which is available to most of our partners on just watershed protection. And these things are things that they don't have, and we give it to them. So recently, over the last couple of months, because of COVID, we've done a lot of trainings for webinars for most of our corporate partners on how to develop sustainability strategies on watershed conservation and the like. And there's also opportunity for career development for their staff because they're just purely commercial. Some of their teams want to understand what happens in the NGO, in the development sector. So getting some of their teams to work with our teams in the field or to volunteer in offices to take the kind of skills we have that they don't have. These are opportunities, that we can give them. And then lastly, many times we can invest, we can put our own money, and TNC has put its own money many times to be able to prove a case, and then use that case to market the opportunity to private sector and to government. So many times also don't be shy to be able to put your own little money, produce the evidence, and then use that evidence to take to them to say, look what we've been able to do on ourselves. So this is just a snapshot of some of the things that I wanted to share with you now, which is not exhaustive, but I hope it gives you some sense of what you should look out for, appreciate, but also what opportunities exist to be able to tap into that kitty where there is the most money, frankly speaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob, for that great presentation. So we are going to the Q&A session now. So some of you have typed the questions in the chat. If you have not typed yours and you would like to ask it live, kindly type letter Q into the chat and we'll have a chance for you to do that. So in the meantime, we'll start with the questions that was asked by Michael and George Joroge that were referring to the Upper Nairobi Water Fund. So Anthony will be able to answer that. And the question was the first one was on endowment fund, whether it's dominantly or domiciled in Kenya, and what are some of the key features as well as who are some of the donors for that. And then the other question was from George. On how the Upper Tana Nairobi Water Fund engages with the county governments in the region. So Anthony, would you like to take the two questions?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Florence, and thanks for that question. Just to refer to the chat, I think partly was answered by Fred, if you may refer to the chats, but the specific one on where it is domiciled, yes. Our current endowment account is fully domiciled in Kenya. We actually have a local bank providing that service. And it was a pleasant surprise that the local banks had much better returns than the international. So we've been investing with over 10% per annum. The other part of the question in terms of the mix, yes, it's and as you have heard from the other three presenters, it's a blended financing. So we have had, as part of the setting it up, part of the seed capital coming from the GEF funds for the conservation that provided part as a percentage of building that sustainability up right from the beginning. We have corporates, most of them who also have had a mix of it, some of the resources earmarked for conservation activities and a percentage allowed for the endowment. And we celebrate most the cost share from the beneficiaries. That is one small stream that's gonna be very meaningful in the sustainability journey for Nairobi Water Fund as we continue to promote more technologies and many more opportunities for farmers to cost share in it. Alongside that, of course, we've had the main funds going to invest in the conservation, supporting conservation activities, either directly or through partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, for those answers. I hope your questions are well answered. So we'll go to the next question from Eric Hubert. Luis, if you can take this up on how do you ensure that the public sector aligns to the public budgets with the water funds fundraising requirements, and also what does that engagement model look like?
Thank you, Eric. The public sector have often a responsibility for providing for water resource management. In the case of in South Africa's case, we have got the national government who's responsible for managing the resource, but they don't always have the resources to manage the water resource. So by showing them how a water fund can help them to manage the resource, and how the water fund can supplement funding makes a strong case. So engaging them will be to look at what their mandate is, what their challenges are, engage with them through one-on-one discussions, and find out where they are and how they see the water fund's benefits. So once a public sector partner can identify what's in it for them, even the private sector, what's in it for them and how they can benefit, it becomes easier, because we must remember that the public sector has a responsibility in case of municipalities, to their ratepayers. And if they can go to ratepayers with a message of how they invest in, or the people who pay for water tariff, how they invest in watershed restoration, have the message that backs up that intervention, that it's most cost effective, it's sustainable, it creates jobs, it has environmental benefits, then it becomes easier. And the other thing is, when the private sector start investing, the private sector often already pays for water, and to get them to pay additional, to invest additionally to what they already pay for their water, is another strong message to the public sector. In here we have a partner that's already paying, that's willing to invest, and it just makes that compelling case for co-funding and co-investment. Eric, I hope it answered your question.
It does. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Okay, so Louise, thank you so much for that. I guess I'm framing my question in the context of global shocks, right? Like the pandemic that we're in now, sort of global financial crises that happen at various times, that affect, you know, sort of different regions at different times, or have a global effect, and then it impacts, you know, sort of national budgets. So being able to lock in particular resources when competing priorities come. So if we're looking at, you know, the base being rate payments, and people don't have the ability to pay the rates, right? Or, you know, sort of there are other major priorities, like for instance, the vaccine that's coming now and investments that need to be made in that, and then, you know, priority shift. Those kinds of dynamics could affect sort of long-term allocations. Um, how do we track it and, you know, sort of address those kinds of dynamics?
Lawrence, do you want me to respond, or if anybody else wants to respond to that, you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, you can go ahead and someone
Yes,
can add.
Eric, budget cuts is a reality following the COVID situation, and then often also governments have this big upfront budgets that is not always spent strategically. And I always say that government is this big ship and it moves in some direction very slowly. And if we can make and the NGO sector and the water funds we making sure that the ship stays afloat by supporting that big ship. That's the analogy that we're using. So if we look at what government is supposed to be doing and not doing it for different reasons, how they navigate the conflicting priorities. And we can show that by bringing focus to the problem, like in the case of Cape Town, and other areas, even in Nairobi, and how it benefits and support their efforts, they're likely to buy in. And in terms of ratepayers, if a utility can demonstrate to those who pay the tariff that their tariffs is being used to get the highest return on investment and investing in nature with all these different benefits, it also just often if you as a ratepayer know that your money is spent well and brings these different benefits, then you're more willing to contribute. If you use the example of water desalination, if you look at the cost for water desalination, it's almost investing in nature is the calculations that we had, it's 600% cheap, more cost effective to invest in nature. Now, if you go to a ratepayer or somebody pay water tariffs with that argument and say we're investing in nature, they're more likely to agree than saying we're investing in a very expensive option and that it will increase the cost. So yeah, again, I hope it helped.
Yeah, and Louise, let me just add, Eric, that in other sectors, this is already happening. So if you look at the road sector, for instance, there's a fuel levy, percentage of which goes to development of or roads. And these consumers accept it. They don't have a problem with it. You also see that in hydropower generation. Most of the power utility companies have actually a levy there for development of hydropower, and they load it on the bills of the consumers. I think it is in our sector where we've been a bit shy to engage proactively and ask that consumers fund watershed conservation, because ultimately it affects them. So I think the opportunities then, we want to be a bit bold going forward to engage with the right stakeholders to ensure that these opportunities are things that we can go after.
Thanks, Bob and Louise.
Thanks.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say,
sure.
thank you for that, Louise and Bob. I guess my point is exactly that. I think that there needs to be kind of a high impact engagement model with government, sort of at national and sort of local levels, to ensure that the fundraising dynamics that are required, are achieved. And I think, sort of you use the right word, being a bit more bold in terms of how we engage. That's why I wanted to understand what that engagement model could look like. It has to be sort of high impact, in order to ensure that as competing priorities have the ability to shift, that the focus sort of on the water sector and on the needs, and on water source protection doesn't lose focus, and that requires sort of a constant high impact engagement model.
Yeah, great point, Eric. Thank you. So the next question is to Yusla on what are some of the challenges that you have been experiencing in your fundraising efforts.
Yeah, I think I answered during the presentation. The two main challenges we faced actually was the lack of involvement of the public partners at the beginning and of the private sector. But after that, we succeed by organizing training, workshops, and face-to-face meetings to convince them that a water fund can bring a lot of good things to the region and to the local population. So we didn't ask for money in the beginning because we knew they won't give us any money. So we focused actually on funding projects in the field to show them that the relevance of those projects. But now we can see that there is a change, and they are willing to contribute. In the beginning through in-kind contributions. This is why we are working on that MOU with them. And we think that in the next years, maybe we can ask for money, because we know that they have budget for the region actually, and big budgets. We just have to convince them to include the water fund as an activity in their national budget. And the second challenge is the private sector. We tried with a lot of big companies here in Morocco, and even if they have a CSR the CSR departments, and they are not actually used to invest in environmental projects here in Morocco. So it's a little bit difficult to convince them that they will have visibility in that kind of projects, because they are used to sport events, to music events, that kind of, when you have a lot of visibility on TV and on other medias. But now we have to convince them that that kind of projects actually can bring a lot of visibility for them. So I think that those are the two main challenges we faced.
Thank you, Yusla. We have the next question on how to leverage on long-term financing through the regional development banks, and also if that would go to the endowment fund or otherwise. Anthony?
Sorry, Florence, I think I missed the part of the question. My internet is not very stable.
Okay. So the question was on how we can leverage on long-term financing through the regional development banks, and whether that would qualify to go to the endowment fund or otherwise.
Yeah, that's a very heavy question. And probably I'll share my thoughts around it and invite others from the floor. The multilateral, multi-agencies, most of them usually have much to do with public financing, and a lot mainly through either corporate or public, either largely for loans. But I haven't had an experience on how best we can be able to probably do that. However, some of those resources are like what goes through like the facility, like the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. I would imagine similarly, perhaps like through the green, is it the green climate funds, like so, that may be nature-based solutions may become attractive for that kind of financing. So it's a possibility, I think, but perhaps anyone who have some much more direct experience on that can share. But thanks for that provocation. It's a good, important question.
Anthony, let me weigh in. Hopefully, maybe I get it right. So these multilateral lenders, they could offer guaranteed funds to local banks, and then local banks could provide loans to the farmers working in the watersheds that are doing their different economic activities. So if you think about the Upturner, for instance, there's a lot of horticulture that is being grown there by the farmers, or different fruit trees like avocados and the like, some of which are exported to Europe. If the capital required to do that is significant, if somebody provided guaranteed those loans to a local bank so that they de-risk it, then the local banks could loan these farmers, and we can figure out a way that that value chain flows. So maybe that's the one way of how we can engage this multilaterals. And I know some that do this kind of work. So it's not something that we've really developed, but is an opportunity. I think that's the way I would understand it, Anthony. But unlikely that they would then just put money in the endowment fund, because that's not how they operate. Hope it's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Bob and Anthony, on answering that question. So I have exhausted the questions that have been sent. However, we are at the top of the hour with 1 minute remaining, so I think we can close it here. If you have any more questions to any of the presenters today, kindly send it through to my email address, which I promised to put it in the chat, doing it right now. And also in case you need any other assistance in terms of where you can access certain materials, you can also email me and that will be available. To conclude, I'll be sending out the presentations as well as the recording to this webinar to all of you, and hope that you can be able to share these with your colleagues who missed it for one reason or another. Having said that, kindly remember to take our online courses, which are very free, and said, so kindly send in your certificates, and we have some rewards for those who will send in first. So thank you, and have a very good afternoon. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you, Florence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
All right.
Francis.
Bye. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye all. Thanks for attending.